Hello, I'm Don Taylor, and I'm happy to introduce Tom Marsh to all of you. I met Tom and his wife Judy in an early morning fitness class about 16 years ago, and over the years I've learned a lot about how he ticks, and he ticks a lot. He's very active senior like a lot of us. Tom came to Oregon after high school in California with his family and started studying at the U of O. He got a BA and an MA at U of O, and stressing in history and in English. He was a high school teacher for a long time in the Beaverton district, American history, and helped start something called the Arts and Communication Magnet Academy, which is still going strong. In fact, Tom, I looked up online and they're doing a $39 million renovation of their buildings and everything. He also served in the Oregon legislature from 1975 to 79. Married Judy, 56 years at this point, 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters. He's spoken to various groups, including on OPB radio and at ICL here before, and at other state library series. He published a book in 2012, which I know from experience he worked on for years. It was quite an effort. And it's called To the Promised Land. It's about the history of government and politics in Oregon. Became interested to tell the story of the children on the Oregon Trail, which is what we're going to hear today. And I'd like you to really give a warm welcome to Tom Marsh.
Good morning. I prefer to be on the floor. I'm a high school history teacher, and I want to be near my kids, okay? Dawn and I are going to talk. I'm going to explain something, and then we're going to take 5 minutes to do something. I would like this to be, I'm planning this to be an interactive session where the members of the audience are actually part of the presentation. What we are about to do is to distribute some cards, these cards that look like this, perhaps not this much text, but on the cards are stories about immigrant children and or their mothers, and these are actual quotes, or they are facsimiles of actual situations that that person experienced sometime along the trail. I thought it best, rather than me standing up here yakking for 2 hours, is to let the people who made the history and wrote about it or talked about it, let you hear their words. Let them tell you their stories. So that's what we're going to do today. Now this is going to take some coordination, particularly since Don is going to have a microphone of his own, and he will be at a point in the presentation, he will start coming out into the audience and asking where you are, because those of you who agree to take a card will explain how this is going to work once we get the cards distributed, okay? This should take about 5 minutes. So if you'll bear with us, and if you'd like to do this, raise your hand so we can come to you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll note on your cards in the upper left corner is a number, something usually in the 30s, it could be a 40, and that relates to the number of the slide on the screen. So when I get to that slide, I will ask for those who have a card for number 40 to read it. Now, you will also have a second digit on your card, a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5, and that's the order in which we'll read them. So I'll say, those of you who are let's say number 38, number 1, would you please raise your hand? And Don will come to you at that point, and you will stand. If you would, please take your time and read the card. If you want to ham it up a little bit, some of the stories are very powerful. You'll almost weep when you hear them. Stories are just, there's a couple of them I can't even talk about because they just break me up. Anyway, that's how it's going to work. Do we have any questions? You understand how it's going to go? And we'll help you along. All right, here we go. I was in the Capitol off and on for a couple of years recently working on a committee there. And I was looking at a group of fourth graders. As you know, fourth grade curriculum in the state of Oregon requires teachers to teach a unit on Oregon history. So kids in this state in the fourth grade learn something about Oregon history, which is great. High school students also are in the Capitol, mainly because of the government piece. They can learn something about state government. So throughout my time at the Capitol on this committee, I was very aware of students in groups coming through the Capitol. And it started dawning on me one day as I'm here in particular. This is in the rotunda, this great mural is in the rotunda. As children are going up and down the stairs into the House or Senate chamber, and I'm very aware of them, I'm starting to look at the mural, which I really hadn't done for a long time. And I said, look, Tom, there are only 2 children depicted in this large mural, which has large numbers of immigrants. It's a little hard to see, I'm sorry. But a large number of immigrants. There's in the front row on the right over here, there are 2 children right here, and there's a baby here. That's it. Children were 20% of the pioneers who came on the trail to Oregon. So I got to thinking, what about the children? Where are the children? Here we have the Senate chamber. This depicts the news has arrived in Oregon that the statehood bill has been signed by the president, and Oregon is officially the 33rd state in the union. This is not February 14th, obviously, because it took the better part of 4 months for them to get the news. Here we have a boy and a girl facing away from us in the celebration. These are the only 2 children you'll find in the 8 murals that are depicted in the Capitol. So where are the children? What about the children? So that's what got me going on this. Somebody needs to start telling the story about all of these children who came here in 1843 through 1859, the period just prior to statehood. So here we go. The ride is about to begin. 40% or 20,000 or 40% of those who came to Oregon, roughly before 1860, were children, as I've mentioned. So where are they? What was the children's story, and why don't we know about it? And that's how I decided to do this. So 2 years ago, I began my research. Here we have the Oregon Trail. Now I am actually going to walk and point it with my finger, because I don't want to use that pointer. All right, we're starting over here at the Mississippi River. The Mississippi was what we call the jumping off place, the jumping off point. There were a number of small towns on or near the river from which all of the wagon trains left. They came to either Iowa, which was a very new place at the time, to what the Mormons called Canesville, but which quickly became known as Council Bluffs, Iowa. Council Bluffs, right here. Independence, right here. St. Joseph, Kansas City, these are all jumping off places. Now, the trail itself started there, and most of you all know this is old stuff. They came up through Kansas and joined here, typically here, or perhaps here, 2 routes, joined the Platte River, and they followed the Platte River all the way into Wyoming, into the Rockies. About 1,000 miles, about half the trip is along the Platte River. Now, I could spend 10 minutes talking about the Platte River and what kinds of obstacles it presented, but I don't have that kind of time. So I'm just skimming along today. Lots of this is just going to be very, very shallow. Here we have Fort Laramie. That's one of the most important points on the trail because, for a number of reasons, This is one place where the government, starting in 1850, decided they should start trying to count the number of immigrants who were coming past Fort Laramie. Duh. All right. This is 1850. The gold rush has started in California in late 1848, throughout 49, and through 1850. We have a federal census in 1850. California didn't join the Union until 1850. It wasn't even part of the United States until 1848. So this huge influx of people to California to look for gold is, of course, what sparked the migration west. That and the donation land law in Oregon passed in 1850, where for the first and only time in the federal history of our country, the Congress of the United States gave federal land away for free. All you had to do was to go 2,000 plus miles to get there and to claim some of it for you and your family. That's all you had to do. All right, here we have South Pass here, 7,500 feet. Here we have what's called Sublet's Cutoff, and I'll only talk about that because we're going to see a slide about this, but you need to realize that this is very specific. This map is very specific to these events here and to these years. In fact, you can think more, what you really should be thinking about is taking some wet noodles, spaghetti noodles out of the pot and throwing it against the wall. That's what the trail really looked more like. Because with each passing year, people kept finding newer routes or better routes or what they thought were better routes and blazing new trails. So it became a mishmash. Don't think of the Oregon Trail as one line, because it isn't. It isn't. It's not like that at all. The Oregon Trail, up until about 1842, was called the Platte River Road. That's what it was known as. It didn't become the Oregon Trail and popularized until 1843, 44, and 45, when the idea of manifest destiny starts getting thrown around, and we've got to make this about Oregon. We're not about the Platte River. We're trying to get people to think about going out far west to this place called Oregon. This is before the gold rush, okay? And then here we have Fort Walla Walla, which is, of course, the Whitman Mission, and on to Fort Vancouver and to Portland over here. Now, what I'm about to do is tell you that in May, my wife and I took a week-long road trip. We drove back across parts of the Oregon Trail. We drove back all the way to Fort Hall. This is Pocatello today. Fort Hall today, you'll see a slide here in a minute. Fort Hall was the point at which the California Trail broke off here, and those bound for California go across this way, Nevada, and down into California. This is not accurate here. It goes down into here like this into Sacramento Valley. Okay, so we took this route here to Pocatello and to Fort Hall, and then we swung back down through here, not there, came back down right in through here from Twin Falls, in through northern Nevada. This is the California Trail here, and here is where this trail continues down in here, but right about Winnemucca is where the Applegate Trail in 1846 is established. So there's now a new route into Oregon from the south. What I want you to understand here, hope you can understand, is that for the thinking in terms of this Oregon Trail here, the only people who went from one end to the other were those who were coming to Oregon. It was the route by which the other groups, those other groups being those headed to California, and of course, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. 1847 is when they started coming into Utah. They were coming into Mexico because in 1847, Utah wasn't in the United States. It wasn't part of the United States. It was part of Mexico. So they were technically living in the United States when they went to Utah, beginning in 1847. Interesting stuff what you find when you start reading about history. Anyway, I'm using this map. It's a little blurry, but what's nice about this map is that you can see the topography a little bit better. You can see the mountains. And when you're coming all the way across the plains from over here, you're basically, what you're doing is you're climbing all the way. It's getting higher and higher, basically coming from sea level up to 7,500 feet. But it's gradual. But this, of course, causes all kinds of problems once you get into higher elevations. Then you get issues with letting wagons down steep slopes. You get a lot of wagons tipping over. This is very common. Okay, moving on. This is the sublet cutoff. This photograph is taken from a large, huge, 6x4 photograph. This is taken in the museum, which is called the California Trail Museum in Elko, Nevada. If you've never been there, my wife and I had never been to northern Nevada before. This is brand new for us. And here's this really good museum out in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. California Trail Museum. Now, the road to the right goes to Oregon. The road to the left goes to California. That's simple. This is just about 100 miles west of the South Pass in Wyoming. Okay? This is a replica of Fort Hall. The original Fort Hall is on what is today an Indian reservation. It was about 27 miles north of current Pocatello. So this is a rebuild of the original Fort Hall. And the reason why Fort Hall is important again is because it's the dividing point where the Californians leave on the California Trail and the Oregonians continue on westward on their own. This is a modern replica of one of the wagons. This is would be one of the larger wagons. I can't show you a picture of a typical wagon because there were so many different kinds of wagons. Many of them were just simple farm wagons. The farmers had wagons. They had to have wagons. And they just simply used what they had. And that's what took them to Oregon. This is Keene Pass. This is, I have to stop to tell you this. The Oregon Trail is very difficult to find in most places because the freeways and highways have been put over the top of them. Or they're on private land and or have been plowed under by farmers in their pastures, their fields. It is possible to find some pretty big segments of the trail, even in Oregon. Those of you who've tried to do this know that you can see some trail in the Blue Mountains. You certainly can see it there. You can see it also in the Columbia Gorge. You're going to see that in a minute. Keene Pass, this is between Nyssa and Vail, Oregon, just inside the border of Oregon. And there's about 70 miles. You get off the interstate, you can drive for the 70 miles through the country along this trail. There's places to stop. Kiosk, you can get out and read the signs, and porta potties, those are really nice in the middle of nowhere. And it's really fun to do, but it just gives you some sense of what some of the topography looked like. Now, this would have been pretty easy going in here, as you can see, but you'll notice there are virtually no trees. If you don't have trees, you don't have wood. If you don't have wood, you can't make fires. If you don't have fires, you can't heat water, you can't cook food, you can't bathe your baby. This, of course, is Farewell Bend on the Snake River, where the trail basically divides. Many Oregons are going to go inland here, and the rest are going to go north, either to Walla Walla or up to the Columbia and down the Columbia River itself. This is Farewell Bend. If you haven't been there, it's beautiful. There's a beautiful state park there. This is a typical scene. This is taken south of Twin Falls, Idaho, on the way to the town of Wells, Nevada. I hope nobody here is from Wells, because if there was ever an armpit, this is it. This is part of the trail that you can see out of Baker City. This is at the Oregon Trail Museum in Baker, which was established in the early 1990s. And we had revisited it for the first time. It had been 20-some years since our kids were teenagers. Any rate, it's a wonderful museum. It's a really, really good museum, and here you're going to see why. Their depictions of scenes on the trail are so good, and you can see, you can begin to imagine what it was like. They've done a wonderful job. The oxen, the sheep just roaming freely. Oxen were the animal of preference on the trail. Over half of the animals that pulled wagons were oxen, and mules were the second most popular, horses third. Mules were by far the best animal because they're the strongest and they can go the farthest distance and they can go the fastest. But they're also the most expensive, and that's why most people didn't have mules, because they couldn't afford them. This scene is poignant, the replica of a grave by the trail, and a young girl praying there for the departed. There are thousands of these graves along the trail, thousands and thousands and thousands of them. 20 to 30,000 deaths on the trail alone just from cholera. 20 to 30,000. We'll never know the numbers, but they're staggering. And the children are here, remember. This is the world that the children are in. This is what I'm trying to impart to you, is so we can better understand what these children experienced. Typical wagon, family wagon. Everybody had water. They had grain, if they could, for the cattle. The basic diet consisted of huge tubs of smoked bacon, dried beans, a little sugar, a little salt, coffee, rice, and basically bread. The women tried to bake bread every day when it was possible. That was it. That was it. There wasn't much else. Some people threw out the pickles, and some people had jams, and they had taken canned fruit. But they found it totally impractical to have glass jars in a wagon that was always bumping up and down without any cushioning. This is the Umatilla River at the little town of Echo, which is the southwest of Pendleton. And this is one of the routes that people took across the plains. And this is, again, in late May. Near this point, from 1843 to 63, westbound immigrants caught their first sight of the Columbia River, erected by the Trail Association in 1940. This is a highway. This isn't the freeway. This is a state highway here on the left. But this is where people started. This is part of the trail that came down right here. And thousands of people came down that little trail. And you can see it. It's there. There's a sign there. You can walk up to the end of that as far as you care to. And then this is the view from higher up on that hill. This is what they saw, well, without the freeway and the railroad tracks. But this would have been the first view that they would have had of the Columbia River, the people who had come this particular route. This is the wonderful Fort Dallas, the Dallas Museum in the Dalles, Oregon. I had never known this was here. We always went there to Psoriasis Park to have a picnic, but we did never go to this museum. This is a wonderful, wonderful building. This is the only one left from the original fort, which was only in existence about 10 years. But this house is extraordinary because of the detail of the craftsmanship, the woodwork in this building. This building dates to 1856, before statehood. This is really old. The surgeon, the camp surgeon, lived in this house with his family. It's extraordinary. It's really worth going to see. Here we go. We're getting into the meat. The immigrants, who were they? 60% of them were farmers. I'm going to read this so I get it right. 60% of the immigrants were farmers. Well, what would you expect? Most Americans were farmers. Most people lived on farms in mid-19th century America. Number two was professional. 12% were professional. Then we have craftsmen, 10%. Then we have small merchants, 9%. And wait till you hear this. The fifth largest group, 8%, ministers. Now there you have one of the reasons for coming to Oregon. That's one of the 4 major reasons why people came west, to start churches, to bring the gospel this side of the continent. Presbyterians, Methodists, Disciples of Christ, Roman Catholics, Baptists. Those are the biggest groups. And the Mormons, of course, had already stopped in Utah. Okay. What were their states of origin? Number 1, Missouri, a slave state. You go back and read early Oregon history, our first governor in this state was pro-slavery, elected. He was in favor of slavery. So was one of our first U.S. senators. Okay, now that's a big story. I actually give whole lectures on that piece right there. Okay, coming along here, number 2 was Illinois, slightly behind Missouri. Number 3 is Iowa. Number 4 is Indiana. Number 5 is Michigan. Number 6, Arkansas. I had no idea that over 4% of the immigrants who came to Oregon were from Arkansas, another slave state. Interesting. And the 7th largest group was from Wisconsin. So you can see we're talking about the upper Midwest, the area around Missouri. The thing that's interesting is that we can go back and look at that map of the Oregon Trail and say, oh, it's 2,000 miles roughly 2,000 miles from the Missouri River to the west coast. Well, wait a minute. And the history books have never emphasized this. And that is, wait a minute, they just didn't wake up in Missouri. They had to get to Missouri before they could start on the trail. So they had to come from Illinois, or they had to come from Indiana to get to Missouri. So many of them, the idea, and you read this in history, oh, it was only a 5 or 6 month trip. No, it wasn't. Most people, including the Pringle family we're going to see today, the Pringles of Salem, by the way, the Pringles took 8.5 months because they had to come from someplace else to get to Missouri. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So the idea is that a lot of people were already tired before they started the trip. They've been on the trail for 4 or 5 weeks. The Scotts were a classic case. The Scotts, the Abigail Scott, Dunaway Scotts, the Harvey Scotts, those Scotts, they came from Illinois. It took them 5 weeks to get from Illinois to the trail. So keep that in mind too. It's a long way, folks. It's way more than 2,000 miles for most of these people. And remember, most of them walked. Any child over 5 years old walked or rode on the back of a horse. They walked all the way. Gee, it's a different time, isn't it? Can you imagine any group of people walking 2,000 miles today? I can't. Okay, moving on. We're down to what motivated them to leave their homes and farms. Okay, we've already know religion is one of them. Land is another one. Gold is another one. And number 4 would be opportunity. We talked about the craftsmen and the professionals. Wait, they're going to need lawyers. They're going to need title companies. They're going to need recorders. They're going to need people to build the wharves. San Francisco is booming. We've got to put in an infrastructure. We're building a society here where there's none, basically. We have to have jails. I mean, people saw that those were opportunities that they could get in on, and they would go to California, they would go to Oregon to do those things. Oh, I'm going to go back a minute. What did Oregon represent to them? I read a wonderful quote yesterday by John Mack Faragher, who's one of the prominent trail historians. And Faragher wrote, he said, Oregon is for families because Oregon is for homesteading. Think about that one. And that really pretty much tells it all. This was the motivation. The Oregonians were always different than the other people on the trail because they were primarily interested in coming here as families to get a piece of free land and to settle down and start a new life. That was the major motivation for Oregonians. That was not the motivation for the Californians. What was notable about the ages of the majority? 2/3 of them were aged 16 to 35. 16 years old to 35. 2/3 of the people who came. Now this is probably the most familiar photograph that we have. You see this published in more places, of a family on the Oregon Trail. I cannot tell you who the family is, I cannot tell you the location, and I cannot tell you the year. This is a part of the collection at the Denver Public Library, and I'm going to have to simply call them up because I can't find it online. This might be later, but it also might be a Mormon family. And there's all kinds of clues. Okay, 3 women and 1 man. Where are the other men? Or are 2 of those women daughters, older daughters? Or are they sisters of either the man or the woman sitting on the wagon tongue with the 2 girls? We don't know, but it tells you a lot about what the wagons look like. And you notice how filthy she is, how dirty they are. And notice they don't have any shoes on their feet. They're barefoot. Yes, most of them were barefoot, including the women. Not so much the men because they had heavier boots. So you're barefoot walking across hot sand, sharp rock, pine needles, cactus, and you're a little kid. And you're thirsty, and you're hungry, and this goes on for month after month after month. And nobody has taken time to write about these children. That's one of the huge gaps in our history. Okay, now, I don't want to get on my soapbox. Here's another family here, a smaller one, and a team of horses. Much smaller rig. Again, it's the full beard. There's a small child in the wagon and another child in the back, but not much of a wagon, really. Again, I can't tell you when or where that was taken. And this is one of the problems we have. We don't have photographs from the Oregon Trail. There are virtually none because it's too early. It's the 1840s. Yes, we do have photographs of the Willamette River and early Portland as early as 1851, 1852. So why don't we have pictures of kids on the Oregon Trail at that time? Well, remember that photographs were done with big glass plates. And those don't ride very well in wagons. So there are very, very few, any kind of visual things to show us people on the trail. Just so you know. Here we go. How many immigrants were there? How many immigrants were there? This is from Unruh, who's probably the most famous of the trail historians. Here we go, right over here on the side. You can see the numbers are very small. We'll be talking about the migration of 1843 in detail a little bit later. But you see the numbers picking up here? Now, what's interesting here is that Oregon is not technically part of the United States at all during this time. We are in joint occupation with Great Britain. We both have joint title to the land and co-equal citizenship rights. But so the Oregonians are coming here, I should say the Americans are coming to Oregon, not knowing if Oregon is technically going to end up in the long run, in the near future or long run, as part of the United States. So they were kind of making a big gamble here. But notice the numbers starting to pick up. 2,500 in 1845, 1,200 in 1846, 4,000 in 1847. Now what's typical of these groups is that most of them are family units. These are where the Oregon families start coming. If you took these numbers and applied them to California a little bit later, you would see that it's overwhelmingly single men. Families are very small numbers in California. And then we see what happens. Here's the donation land law, 1850. We jump from 49. which was a cholera year, a bad cholera year. And besides, it couldn't have gotten on the trail anyway because it was taken over by all the men coming, looking for gold in California. 3,651, another cholera year. And look what happens in 52. 10,000 come to Oregon alone in 1852. Then 7,500, 6,000. You can see the numbers for yourself. So this is basically where the Oregon population of roughly 53,000, 54,000 in 1860 comes from, right in here. This is it. Again, children, at least 20%. Some of those, actually, we can go back here. The 1843 trip, which I'll preface now but talk about a little bit later, the 1843 was basically, that was 875 people, were one party, the Oregon Immigration Company, broken up into 4 groups, each with its own captain, overwhelmingly families. Interesting story. My wife didn't come today because she gets too nervous, because she knows I digress and I will never get through. I could be here until 3:30 this afternoon. That's how much is here that I can't tell you about because I don't have the time. But I will digress here. My first digression. The men were counted. 288 men out of the 875. The women and children were not counted at all, nor were they named and listed, because they wasn't thought important. History would only be interested in the names of the men who blazed the trail. So this reminds you that we're talking about a patriarchal society, strongly patriarchal society. The men ran the show. Most of the women, virtually none of the women wanted to come to Oregon. Their diaries are full of it. Oh, we regret leaving our mamas and our daddies and our grandparents and our brothers and our sisters and our friends and our churches and our farms. These are our homes. Husbands didn't consult their wives. They said, pack it up, we're leaving. And that's true with the children. The children had no recourse either. They were kids after all. So very few women, their diaries and the letters, they just bemoan the fact that they were reluctant travelers. They didn't want to go in the first place. Okay. See how much fun this is? 350,000. This is the number that most historians will agree is in the ballpark. We don't know how many people came on the Oregon Trail. We'll never know that. But the number that historians generally agree is it's around 350,000 people. Nothing like this has ever happened in the world, ever. This many people coming on one route for so far to so far away. It's never happened anyplace else. That many people. Now, the vast majority of them, of course, are going to California. Washington, you know, is a blink of the eye. It's a territory in 1853. It was part of Oregon until 53, technically. And remember, Washington doesn't become a state until 1889, 30 years after we are. That's how much later Washington was to develop. Numerically, Oregon-bound immigrants were the second largest of the 3 groups on the trail. Those groups bound for California and those destined for Utah being the other 2 groups. The Mormons being the 3rd largest group, Oregonians second, and the Californians, of course, first. Only those immigrants bound for Oregon traveled the Oregon Trail from end to end. The majority of immigrants traveled hundreds of miles overland before they got to the Missouri. We've already talked about that. Primary sources. We need to talk about this. How do we know what we know about this experience? Well, the most important thing are the diaries. About slightly under 1,000 women's diaries have been located and or published. Not very many, under 1,000. But it's remarkable when you think about what women were going through on the trail every single day, that they ever found any time at all to write a daily entry in their diary about what they had done that day. The women's diaries and the letters are, and I have to keep talking about diaries. The women's diaries and the letters are, of course, 2 of our major sources about what we know about the trail experience. But there's another important 2 more sources of diaries too. Men also wrote diaries. We have about 100 men's diaries. And the trail, the migration of 1843, we have 12 men's diaries from that expedition alone. One woman's diary. And that's the only time that happened on the trail, where the predominant number of diaries were written by men, not women. And then the third set of diaries, of course, are the ones we're most interested in, the diaries written by children. Diaries written by children. There are approximately 90 of them, 90, not very many. And you will hear some from 3 or 4 of them today, because we're going to let their words speak to you. The letters were important too. They're the second most important source of information. People regularly wrote letters home. You say, well, wait a minute, what about the Postal Service? Virtually every fort you stopped at, in fact, remember when you're going this way to Oregon, there are people going that way. It was continuous. Remember, there were trappers constantly going. There were all kinds of expeditions, military expeditions, scientific expeditions. There were even companies out of Europe, big game expeditions. You could pay fabulous amounts of money and come with a party of men with big guns and go out and kill as many buffalo as you wanted to. They're on the trail. They're going back. The letters could be carried by anybody, and people regularly took your letters back for you. That's how they got back. All right. Journals, not going to talk about reminiscences. Very important. Newspaper articles, important, but I'm not going to talk about them. Reminiscences. Oregon, very early, the pioneers here established a pioneer association. They met every single year, every summer, till well after 1900. And these old-timers got together and they reminisced about their experiences, what they remember about coming on the Oregon Trail. A lot of them were children at the time, but most of them were young adults. And they would reminisce, and hundreds of these reminiscences were actually published. One historian read over 450 of them in her research, 450 reminiscences. Now, reminiscences are nice. The problem is they're usually written 30, 40, or 50 years, or 60 years after the event. The people who are remembering them are remembering, oh, come on, think back when you were 8 years old, what you were doing. Or when you were 6 years old or 9 years old. You probably don't remember very much, at least I don't. I grew up in a big active family. There was always something going on. But, what happens is that they get together, they reminisce, they're having some ham and potato salad, and they're sitting around the table as they do every year and talking about this event. Well, I wasn't even on that trail at that time, but after I hear the story enough times, I begin to think I remember it too. And that's another thing that happens with memory. So reminiscences are sketchy. And you want to read them, and especially if you find patterns, but the better sources are the letters and the diaries. An immigrant company was a moving community consisting of wagons drawn by large animals, roving herds of cattle, milk cows, horses, oxen, mules, dozens or hundreds of people, including children, on foot or horseback. Is there any wonder the children got run over by wagons or stampeding oxen? Or that happens all the time. Stampedes were a real problem on the trail. Remember, lots and lots and lots of the parties had large herds of cattle with them. The migration of 1843, the Applegate brothers brought 1,000 head of cattle. They started out with 1,800 got through. So you got these great herds of cattle among these 875 people and all their oxen and all these little children and people walking all over the place. Crazy. Here we go. Oregon-bound immigrants traveled in nuclear or extended families. Lots and lots of records of grandparents coming along too. 3 generations traveling together. Very, very common. A family traveling alone was rare. Too many things could go wrong on the trail. Wagon breakdown, lame or sick draft animals, family illness. Boy, we're going to hear a powerful story about that today. 20% of trail mothers were pregnant sometime during the overland trip. 20% of them were pregnant. Can you imagine being pregnant on the Oregon Trail? And better yet, having the baby on the trail. And you already have 2 toddlers. What are you going to do with that? Well, obviously, if you don't have women in your family who are with you to help, or older children to help, it's going to be a real struggle. Now remember, if you're traveling as a congregation, and there were many wagon trains that were made up of 50, 60, 70 people from the same church. So that was a built-in support system too for women with tiny children. The men were basically worthless. Yeah, 20% pregnant. Births went on every single day on the trail. Challenges facing immigrant mothers. This is Melvina Baker Iliff, a recollection in 1853. One of their most hazardous experiences was finally portaging their wagons and few possessions down the canyon. Mrs. Weaver walked the entire distance carrying a small child in her arms and leading another. This is a group that came through Canyonville, Southern Oregon. Okay? They came on the California Trail and then they cut through. Well, they were sorry they did it because it was a terrible way to come. They had all kinds of trouble. When she arrived in Canyonville that night, September 1853, her dress was torn off at the knees. Her husband and her 11-year-old daughter brought a few supplies and the oxen, leaving the wagon in the canyon until they could get help. They couldn't get the wagon through the canyon. That night, Mrs. Weaver gave birth to an infant in the little settlement of Canyonville. Since she had absolutely no clothes for the baby, a soldier from the company stationed there gave her his coat in which to wrap the baby. The trail was fraught with challenges and dangers. Natural dangers included violent summer storms, torrential rains, etc., stampeding animals, water shortages, drownings, etc. Now, I think we're getting close to the cards. I have to take a second here. Would you like to, you want to take a time out now? Okay. See? All right, let's take a break. 10-minute break, okay? 10 minutes? Thank you. Is this better? I was told I was too loud. Is this okay? Well, all right. We're going to backtrack a little bit because I got a little ahead of myself because I wanted to make sure that I told you about certain things so you'd have that some context. We're going to go back and we're going to start with cards now. Now, we're going to go back to the individual who has a card for number 26. The immigrants. Oh, excuse me, I don't want to be that far back. Oh, it's not important. The card I'm looking for is what were the motivations for coming? And we have a story here of a man and his reasons for bringing his family west. And Don, we're ready to go. Who has card number 26? Here we go. Don over here.
I've got a mic.
Oh, he's got. Oh, great.
It's my own personal mic. Okay.
Yeah, for another minute.
Let me read this. I left Missouri for Oregon. What started me this way was this. I thought it was a good climate. Another inducement was to settle my family of boys. They were getting to be men. Land was hard to get, and I thought by moving to a new country, my boys could shift for themselves. And this is William Shaw, who was an immigrant of 1844.
All right. So a little bit different story. Boys can shift for themselves if they've got some land. Okay, now we're going to go on now to 33. We're jumping over to 33. If I can find that on the screen here.
I think I'm a guy this morning, so whatever.
Forget about this.
May 1st, the remainder of the company crossed by ferry, which consists of 2 flatboats owned by a Shawnee Indian whose name is Fish. 3 weeks later, May 25, about 3 o'clock, the most violent hurricane overtook us I ever experienced. The wind blew from every point of the compass with utmost violence, and the rain fell in torrents. Its severity was such as to blind man and take his breath to face the storm. You can just imagine that. to turn away. Everything in our wagons appeared wet, went to bed in wet beds, 12 miles. Virgil Pringle, immigrant of 1846.
Okay, now, thank you, Dee. That was well done. This is Virgil Pringle of Pringle School, Pringle Creek, 1846. This is one of the early and most important of the early immigrants. Virgil Pringle, his wife Fern, P-H-E-R-N-E, she was the one who motivated him to donate land from their claim for a school, a public school to be built. And Pringle School is on that piece of land today. They're 1846, so we're talking really, really early Oregon history. Fern Pringle was Fern Brown. Her mother was Tabitha Brown. Those of you who know Oregon history know who Tabitha Brown is. One of the most important early pioneers there was. She gets the credit for being the founder of Pacific University in Forest Grove. The Tabitha Brown, she's 66 years old. She's part of a group of 22 relatives traveling with the Pringles. Her daughter is married to a Pringle. And the Pringles have 6 children of their own. Her son, Tabitha's son, Oris Brown, and his wife and 8 children are also part of the party. Okay. So that's interesting. 66. Her brother-in-law, her deceased husband's older brother, Uncle John Brown, was 79. He rode a horse all the way from Missouri to Oregon. They came on the southern route. They were in the first group that came on the Applegate Trail in 1846. 79 years old on a horse the whole way. He lived in Salem 2 years and died at the age of 81. Probably, if not the oldest, certainly one of the oldest people who ever came across the trail. Just a little sidelight. Okay, I have to be quiet now. Next card. Number 2.
All right, and as I read this, you can think of how many of these events you've actually seen in your life and how frequently. Edwin Bishop, an immigrant of 1846, quotes, "Witnessed these events in a single morning, a birth, a death, a funeral, and a wedding, within 2 hours and the radius of 2 miles, revealing that the westward migration encompassed more dramatic events than the normal ebb and flow of life in more bucolic surroundings," close quotes. 1846.
Next, go ahead. Who's number 3? Is it number 3? We're still on number 33. We're looking for Elizabeth Ann Brooks. Okay. Here.
Elizabeth Ann Brooks and her 6 children left their Michigan farm in the late summer of 1850 to join her husband in California. Once on the trail, the family found themselves in deepening trouble. There was little clean water and forage. The family couldn't keep up with the speedier wagon trains. The family was alone and vulnerable. One morning, a band of Crow Indians appeared. The children were terrified. The Indians, however, divided into 3 smaller groups and surrounded the family, where they remained for a week, moving west with the family until they were reunited with their husband and father, who had come to meet them.
That story speaks for itself. Remember, the Indians are portrayed as bad. Everybody was scared of the Indians. We could have a whole talk about the Indians and the importance of they played on the Oregon Trail. A lot of people wouldn't have made it if it hadn't been for Indians. But that is a short story waiting for somebody to write. Take that real life story. That's a great short story. Thank you. Next. We are moving on to to number 35, to Amelia Stewart Knight.
This was handed to me by a woman who had to leave. 1853. The men and the boys had their hands full. I was obliged to take care of myself and the little ones as best I could, there being no path or road except the one where the teams traveled. We kept as near the road as we could, winding around fallen timber and brush, climbing over logs, sometimes lifting and carrying our son, Chat. I was sick all night and not able to get out of the wagon in the morning.
Amelia Stewart Knight, remarkable diary. She's coming over the Barlow Trail. She's climbing over stumps. She's got a child in her arms. They're coming down the Barlow Trail, Laurel Hill. If you've ever been up there, it's still a scary place today. How they got wagons down there, I don't know. 3 days later, she had the baby. So she's climbing down the trail with the child in her arms. She has her 8th child 3 days later near Troutdale, modern-day Troutdale. Now, the Knights went across the river. They took a land claim over on the Washington side. Actually, they bought a farm on the Washington side. There were 8 children altogether, the oldest of whom was Plutarch Knight. Plutarch Knight, you laugh at the name, there was a Seneca as well. But Plutarch Knight came to Willamette University, became a minister, and was one of the founders of the Oregon School for the Deaf and Dumb in Salem, Oregon. Plutarch Knight, 17-year-old boy. That was his mama we were talking about. Next, we're going to go to Handsacker to number 36. First Handsacker, number 1. There's 2 Handsackers.
I'll be a man. A woman, no doubt sick, was lying in a bed beside the trail. Her husband, with a babe in arms, was walking about trying to keep the little thing quiet. We boys wanted to stop the teams while we found out the cause of such a scene, but no, we did not stop. Samuel Hunsaker was a teamster, age 22, and I imagine that woman had cholera.
Okay, yes, you're no doubt right. Handsacker was born in England. His mama brought him and 8 or 9 of the other children. He was the youngest of the family to the United States, and he grew up here from the age of 12 till 22. He signs on as a teamster, one of the jobs that many young men would have to get out here in the first place. They had to have some way to make their way across. Most of them didn't have any much money to speak of. But Handsacker, what the story is that the men were not allowed, the young men were not allowed to stop to investigate because the boss said, we got to keep moving. That's their problem. Shove west. That's what happened. Next. We have Susan King.
My dear husband, John King, and our precious daughter, Electra, and darling 9-month-old son, and I, Susan King, drowned in the Columbia River in 1845.
Whole family wiped out. Okay, another Handsacker. Number 3.
Well, it sounds like Handsacker had to tell the bad stories because here's still a third. 2 of our companies went to the ferry this morning. On the way, the men were told about a father who, in trying to reach the ferry, got into a slough which he had crossed and was drowned, leaving his family to mourn his loss. It is said that all the money they had, amounting to $700, was on his person. The family had gone back home without making any attempt to get the body out. They are from Warren County, Illinois. Diary of Samuel Handsacker, 1853.
Thank you. Next, we have Joel Hembry.
I am 6 years old and my name is Joel Hembry. I came from Tennessee with my mama and daddy and 7 brothers in 1843. I died when a wagon ran over me. Mama buried me in a dresser drawer in Wyoming.
This is Abigail
Okay.
Scott.
May 12th, 1852. We passed 7 new graves today. Passed some folks who were preparing a resting place for the remains of a young man who had died of measles. The family had lost 3 of their company at St. Joe. They are entirely discouraged, and they are making preparations to go back to Pennsylvania. May 26th. We passed 4 new graves. One was that of a man who was murdered. He had been killed by buckshot and stabbed with a knife. Those who found him buried him. June 8th, we passed 8 fresh graves. Here of considerable sickness in many trains. We saw upwards of 60 teams ahead of us, besides 2 large droves of cattle. June 16th, we have seen considerable alkali water today. It is considered dangerous for cattle to drink. Several of our company are sick. This morning, we passed a train bearing a female who had died about 2 hours previous. They had buried her husband a week before. We passed 10 new graves today. Scott Family Diary of 1852 by Abigail Scott.
This is one of the most famous diaries and one of the most published diaries, Abigail Scott's diary. She's 17, so we have a teenage point of view here. There were 9 children. The mother, Anne Rollifson Scott, was ill when the trip began. She died on the trail, as did her 4-year-old son, William, die on the trail. Anne Rollifson Scott had 12 births, but 3 of them had not been viable pregnancies, and had the 9 children, all of whom came on the trip. Her last child, the little boy, William, she had great difficulty giving birth, and she really never recovered from that. And so when she came west, she was in her own wagon, basically in bed the whole time, rarely left the wagon. Her 2 youngest children rode in the wagon with her, and that wagon was driven by 14-year-old Harvey and 9-year-old John. Okay, remember we're talking about children here as much as we can. All right, I have to, folks, speed up a little bit. This is a trail sign. This is from one of the kiosks on the trail. You'll see this sign if you take the route that we did. Children, the little adults, get up at 4 a.m., help fetch water, cook, clean up, and pack. Then walk for 10 to 12 miles, pick flowers, take a swim, have a mock battle with buffalo chips. School books and baths are scarce. Go to sleep. Do it all over again 180 times. Thousands of children spend their days like this on the Oregon Trail. A little bit condensed, but you get the idea.
What happened?
This is, all right, we're going to stop right here. Now we're going to go to,
I'm glad to hear it. Thanks for calling. Okay.
we're going to go to number 38 and come back here to number 38, number 1, Harriet Scott.
My name is Harriet Scott, and I'm 11. I rode a horse and herded cows all the way to Oregon in 1852.
11-year-old girl.
My name is Henry Washburn, and I am 14. Father says I'm an excellent rider and swimmer, so he asked me to cross the Snake River to help some cattle who were having trouble. The deep water spooked my horse, and he reared up, and I hit my head on a large boulder, and I was killed. My parents and 13 siblings looked for my body for 2 days, but they could not find me.
I'm going to try to tell this story without cracking up because it's a very sad story. So there are 14 children in the family. This boy, 14, has died in the river, and they couldn't find his body. They spent 36 hours looking up and down the river for this boy's body. Finally, the mother, who is so bereft, her husband says, okay, let's leave a message. What they did in those days, we'll see this in another card, it was they would take a stick or a twig or anything that they could stick in the ground and notch it so they could stick a piece of paper in it. And these were all over the trail. People would expect to read messages. People who went ahead in a family would leave messages for the people coming behind. So it was kind of like all this, all along the Oregon Trail, all these little notes stuck into things. Well, they left a note. She wrote a little note and they stuck it in the willow branch. And she said, if anybody comes along and finds my boy, would you please bury him? I got to get myself together here. She received a letter in Portland later that year in which the man says, I found your boy and I buried him. And in the envelope was a rabbit's foot that his grandfather had given him for good luck. Next.
My name is Waldenberg Muir. I was hanged in Missouri in 1853 by a group of Oregon-bound immigrants for murdering my friend James. I had just turned 17.
Murder was very common on the trail. There were lots of murders. Well, lots meaning several hundred. Next. We've got John Henry Scott. Okay.
Hello, my name is John Henry Scott. I'm 9. I helped my brother Harvey drive our sick mama's wagon from Missouri to Oregon in 1853.
My name is George Washington Shaver. My twin sister, Elzinia, and I are 11 years old. We come on the Oregon Trail to Washington County, Oregon in 1852. Our mama, Elizabeth, is a widow. She is 52. 2 of our older brothers, Francis and Adam, came with us from Iowa. I live with mama on her donation land claim. Elzinia married James Nelson in 1854. She was 13.
This is fun. George Washington Shaver is my wife's great-grandfather. Elizabeth Shaver is my wife's great-great-grandmother. Okay? The 3 of them, Elizabeth, the mother, 52, she had 11 children, 12. All of them, the 2 youngest were in the group, the 11-year-old twins, George Washington and Elizabeth Elzina. Excuse me, Elzina, Elizabeth. They were reverse names of mother and daughter. The land claims they took were where I-5 cuts through Bridgeport Plaza today going north. One of the land claims is now the Tigard High School athletic field. Durham, that was part of the land claim. So they were right there in the middle of it, the Shavers, from the very beginning. I had to say that. My wife isn't here. She couldn't come because she was too nervous for me. All right, next, are we moving on to another group here? We're finished with that, the little adults. Let me go back to this multimedia. This is Elzina Elizabeth Shaver right here. Her name is, she's the 11-year-old girl. This is 1871. She had 12 children, married at 13, as we've just heard. Married at 13, had 12 children, 2 of whom died of diphtheria in 1862, but the other 10 did grow to full lives. But this woman, as a girl, walked across the Oregon Trail. And that's a photograph that my wife found online from a little newspaper in Boardman, Oregon. Most immigrant children, like their mothers, were unhappy about leaving their lives in the East. The decision to immigrate to the Pacific Coast, Utah, was almost always made by men. Wives and children were rarely consulted. Consequently, most women and children were reluctant immigrants. Indeed, most women's diaries dwell on themes of loss, frustration, and sadness of leaving their homes and friends, and most of all, their families, parents, grandparents, brothers, and sisters. Many immigrant children wrote letters to friends and family as they traveled west on the trail. How is King, my dog? Is Grandpa's knee better? How's the new teacher working out? I'm awful homesick, Aunt Lucy. Children, like their mothers, struggled to adjust to their lives on the trail. Okay, I think I will just let that go for that. There's a lot more I could say about it. Moving on, let me see, I've got to keep, we are to Wellborn Beeson, which is number 41, Wellborn Beeson. There you go. Don't you dare throw that.
I don't know why they call me Wellborn, maybe because I wasn't stillborn in the old days. But anyhow, I got 4 entries here, so here it is, 1853. May 27th, we had very hard, tiresome rows of sandy hills, sand a foot deep. We are now on the 500-mile-wide prairie. There are many buffalo heads and bones scattered along the road. There must have been a great many killed here once. May 30th, there are a number of wolves here. Osceoli, our family cow, had a calf tonight. I shot it because it could not travel. July 5th, Henry Church, Walker, and Jim Moorhead and I went swimming. It is very hot. Mother is sick again. Father washed the clothes. Indians around. July 22nd, I am 17 years old today, 2,000 miles away from my native place. We are now within 500 miles of our destination. We had to guard the cattle, ready to pull them out of the mud as they kept sinking all the time. That's me.
Thank you. Wellborn Beeson wrote one of the rare diaries, a diary written by a teenage boy. A really interesting story here. He started on his own to write diaries when he was 14, and he wrote in a diary until the rest of his life. He died in 1896, and he wrote in a diary every single day the rest of his life. So we have here a 16-year-old boy the route starts for him. He turns 17 in July, midway through. He wrote he had little tiny diaries, or little books that would fit into his pocket, and he wrote with a pencil. He wrote every day in these little books, so there were a number of these little books by the time he got to Oregon. But his unusual name, Wellborn, is his mother's maiden name. She was Anne Wellborn. His parents, Anne and John, were English immigrants. They came in 1828 to New York and eventually to Illinois, and it was from Illinois that they came west in 1853. He was an only child. There had been a little girl, an older sister, who had died at the age of 5, so he was ostensibly an only child. So the family has 2 wagons, and they hired a young man to drive one of them, and Wellborn and his father traded off driving the second wagon. His diary is one of the most interesting ones to read because first of all, he's extremely observant, but we get among all the diaries that are out there, this is one of the few diaries we can read to get the sense of what a young man, a boy, is observing and what was important to him, how he was experiencing this world, this new world. He rarely complains. He got sick. His mother was sick off and on, but they did make it. And they came on the trail, the Applegate Trail, in 1853 into southern Oregon. And there was a farm there that was for sale, a small farm, which his father bought. And so they took to homesteading there. They put up fences around the whole thing, of course, cutting the wood and splitting the rails and everything, and created a good little farm. Wellborn Beeson and his father very soon got into trouble with the law in southern Oregon. And the reason why is because they advocated for Indian rights. In fact, this is one reason they had to leave Illinois, is because they kept getting arrested and or fined because they were publicly talking about the abusive treatment that people were directing towards Indians. The Indians were getting a raw break. And that did not go over well in most places. Indians were seen as bad. And so he and his father will both get active in southern Oregon on behalf of doing a better job for Indian people or as our neighbors. They would let Indians sleep in their barn. They would feed a hungry Indian. They treated them in a very Christian way. And this stuff is not in our history books. These people, these are civil rights leaders for Indians in Oregon in 1853, 4, 5, 6, through the 60s. An interesting story. So Wellborn Beeson, the Diary of Wellborn Beeson is certainly worth digging up. It was published by a small group in southern Oregon. At any rate, this is obviously another quote from Wellborn Beeson. Good wood, good water, good grass. So silver bearers kill 2 deer. It is very cloudy, sprinkle a little. First rain since 14th of June. You'll notice here, there's a distance here of about, 10, 12 weeks of no rain, 10 weeks of no rain at all. The irony about coming west on the Oregon Trail was that the worst part of the trail, the most dangerous part, the part where the going was the roughest, was the last third of the trail. So it was at the end of the trail that things got really, really bad. Why? People were sick. People were hungry. The wagons were breaking down. The animals were ill. Many people were down to one oxen. There's plenty of stories of people having a milk cow pulling a wagon because that's the only thing they had. Or ditching everything they owned and putting everything on their back and starting to backpack. People had to do that too. But they're jettisoning their possessions all the way along the trail. They found out very early that they brought too much stuff. Too much stuff. And it was too much weight for the animals to pull. The wagons were heavy enough. Then you put 1,800 to 2,000 pounds and 2 or 3 human beings in the wagon. Usually, the only people in the wagons were the sick, infirm, elderly, or the newborns, or very severely pregnant women with a newborn. If a woman is nursing a baby, she's not going to be very far away from the wagon, and she's not going to have the baby out there on the trail with her. It's going to be in the wagon, so she's got to be in or near the wagon herself. So these are the kinds of things that this is more the reality of what we see with people. And there are plenty of stories in the diaries about how their possessions were jettisoned, particularly when they had to go through narrow canyons or up steep or down steep grades or down steep grades. There are stories of thousands of pounds of bacon, barrels of bacon ditched along the side of the trail because it was too heavy and we can't take it anymore. And furniture. And little stoves. They brought little pot-bellied stoves with them, little like a Dutch oven they could stick on a campfire. Jettisoning stuff all along the trail. Furniture was the first to go. Well, we tried to bring Grandpa's rocker. We brought Mama's organ, little organ. Yes. And you've got all this equipment. You're carrying extra wheel, tire. You're carrying your weaponry, you're carrying your farm tools, you're carrying what you can to feed for the animals. You hope to God that you find plenty of forage so that the animals can eat, because if they can't eat, they can't pull the wagon. It is thought that a family of 5 who were in and out of a wagon during a day, and a yoke of 2 oxen, I think I've got that right, would have required amongst them 70 gallons of water a day. 70 gallons of water a day. One wagon with the animals, 70 gallons. Well, this is why the trails stayed near the rivers. This is basically a river trip. And it also means that you have to cross these rivers. So there's this constant fording. We heard about Fish, the Shawnee Indian, who had set up a flatboat across, ferry across the river. Many Indians figured this out very quickly. They could serve these people, and they became entrepreneurs. And some of them made very good living doing that because the prices were high. $5 for a wagon. $5 was a lot of money. And then also per head of animal. That's why most people let their animals swim freely across the river, maybe with a young man in front. We have lots and lots of stories of people drowning in the river, young men in particular. A disproportionate number of young men drown in rivers because they had to get the animals across, and most of them weren't very conversant with swimming, particularly in swift rivers. And so there are lots of stories of how many drownings occur at this point in this particular river, this particular year as opposed to another year. All the way along the trail where there were these rivers. You'd have to go over and you'd have to go back. Well, you have a big rainstorm. The Platte River starts in the Rocky Mountains. There's a North Fork in Wyoming and a South Fork is in Colorado. So they join at North Platte, Nebraska. But that river is draining the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains. So if you get big storms of fast snow melt, you've got just great volumes of water. There are plenty of stories where all of a sudden we hear a roar and here comes a wave down the river from out of nowhere, 4 or 5, 6 feet high of all this water that's now coming down the Platte. And, you know, God help you if you're in the way, or the animals are in the way, or happen to be fording the river. So this is the kind of thing that people had to regularly learn to live with. So drowning, murder, theft, stampedes, death by wagon, children particularly vulnerable to being killed by draft animals, falling out of a wagon. You all know the story of the Sager children, probably know the story of the Sager children. The Sagers left Missouri in 1844. The mother was not well when she left and will deliver a baby, and she was even less well after that. There were 9 children, there were 7 children, and the parents, the father, there was a stampede, and the father stupidly jumped out of the wagon to wave his arms to get the animals to not come at the wagon. Well, of course, he was run over by the animals. He died the next day, crushed. So the father's out of the picture, and it leaves the unwell mother who's had this baby. The baby dies. The mother dies 26 days after the father. Now you've got the children alone without parents. Well, there are other people in the party who immediately take over and say, and this happened common, children became orphans all the time, and if there was no family there, then somebody else, particularly the ministers, and almost every train had at least one minister, they would take them. In this case of the Sagers, the mother had said to people in the company, she said, take the children to Dr. Whitman. Take them to Wailatpu at Walla Walla. Take them to the mission. And there was a family did take the children to the mission. The 2 oldest boys were part of the massacre at Wailatpu in 1847. The 2 oldest ones, Francis and I remember the other one's name. They were at the time 15 and 17. So the 2 oldest boys died in the Whitman massacre. And the little girl, 6, I think her name was Mary, she got measles. Now, when the Cayuse took the mission and killed, they then, and this is what's typically not in the history books, there were 56 hostages taken by the Indians, and they wanted a ransom paid. to let the remaining women and children loose. And one of the little girls, the littlest Sager girl, was in that group. And she contracted the measles, and she died as well. So the mother is dead, the father is dead, the 6-year-old girl is dead, the 2 teenage boys are dead, and that left, and the baby had died, and that left the 3 oldest girls, and that was it. And the Sager sisters, one of whom will marry into the Knight family. One of the Knight sons will marry one of the Sager girls. But this is the classic story that's told in 4th grade classrooms. One of the saddest stories in the history of the whole trail is what happened to this family in 1844. Okay, I think I should stop and ask for any questions. We have 15 minutes. Oh, what is it? We have another card? Oh, I'm sorry. I got mixed up. Oh, no, absolutely. What's your number, please? Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just goofed up.
That's okay.
I'm getting a little wobbly.
Okay, so I
Maybe
believe
80 after all.
Okay, I believe this was written by a sibling of Mary Jane Long. Let's see if I can get good light on this. So while traveling west in 1852, 13-year-old Mary Jane Long remembered how distressing it was to hear other children beg for water, and how touched she was by the sympathy displayed by her mother when a young sick girl in the company became so dehydrated that she had begun sucking on the wagon cover following a recent rain. Her face was black from the from the dirt on the cover, and the situation prompted Mary Jane's mother to give the child some water. Mother gave her a tablespoon of water as if it were medicine. Other siblings of the frail child soon died, and young Mary has attributed the assistance given by my mother as one of the reasons that she lived.
I am Elizabeth Lord, and I am 8. Last month, I jumped out of our wagon, and my skirt caught on a hook, and it pulled me under the wagon. The front wheel ran over my face, and the back wheel ran right over my tummy. I was lucky, because the trail was very sandy, and I wasn't hurt as bad as you might think. But I have a bad scar on my face.
This is Rachel Taylor, but I don't know how old she is. Do you know? No, Rachel Taylor, how old she might have been?
She's 14.
Okay. And there are 5 short entries. June 5th, 1853, had preaching at our tent in the forenoon and at Mr. Colburn's in the afternoon. Both meetings were well attended. 2 Indians were seen skulking about the camp. June 14th. Night found us near a stream where water was plenty, but not very good. Plenty of prairie dogs and large gray wolves in this vicinity. July 1st. Visited an Indian wigwam where there were 4 children, several men, and a squaw. We passed a magnificent pile of rocks called Scott's Bluff. August 14th. This morning, one of our best oxen was found dead, supposed to have eaten something poison. September 11th. Mother is quite unwell today. A digger came into our tent. I believe Mother had smallpox, whereupon our dusky guest was seen no more.
Okay, the digger, of course, is a Digger Indian. Those were the Indians they were called, the Digger Indians, along the Humboldt River in northern Nevada.
I thought it was someone to dig a grave.
Well, the digger is really interesting because we say this at Walapu too, and that was it. One of the things that the immigrants had to get used to is that Indians would oftentimes were very familiar. They would just come in unannounced and just come into your dwelling. And in this case, the Indian had come in any number of reasons, see what was going on and something, maybe he could get something out of it, or just curious. And so that's an interesting story in its own right. The diggers. Yes, we have another one back there.
13-year-old Margaret McNeil carried her sick little brother on her back as the train moved on, and her parents remained behind to search for lost oxen. That night, a kind lady helped me take my brother off my back, and the people in the camp were very good to us and gave us a little fried bacon and some bread for breakfast. Margaret traveled for a week without her parents. Each morning, one of the men would write a note and put it in the slit of a willow stuck in the ground to tell my family how we were getting along.
All right. You have one more card, do we?
Thank you. Maybe the last one, a short one. Cousins Edward and Warren Applegate, age 9, drowned in the Columbia River when the raft they were on tipped over in 1843. Edward's brother Elijah, 11, managed to swim to shallow water and was saved.
That concludes the reading of the cards. Thank you all very much for doing that. We appreciate it. The Applegate boys, the cousins, were sons of two of the Applegate brothers. And this experience convinced the fathers that there had to be a better way to get to Oregon than coming down the Columbia River. It was just too darn dangerous. So that motivated them then 3 years later to go and discover, quote, and make the so-called Applegate Trail. It was due directly to the death of those two boys on the river. Now I'm going to wind up things here. I'm going to read you a quotation. This first line is mine out of my book. The next one is a quotation. Lucky we are that immigrant children did write diaries and letters about their lives on the Oregon Trail, for it is this body of historical documents from which we are best able to paint a picture of what these children endured to get to Oregon. Their story is simply too important not to tell. Here we go. In the end, every journey west was a history of hardship, and the many hardships that young immigrants encountered during their travel over the plains, rivers, and mountains revealed their resilience and adaptability and better prepared them for their eventual new lives in a frontier setting. The children who journeyed west should be recognized for the hardships and mortal dangers they endured as immigrants. All overlanders were filled with a sense of relief and accomplishment when they reached their destinations. After his family had completed a successful journey to Oregon, Henry Garrison, who was a 15-year-old in 1846, recounted, quote, "Our journey is ended, our toils are over, but I have not tried to portray the terrible conditions we were placed in. No tongue can tell nor pen describe the heart-rending scenes through which we have passed." That's it. Thank you. I'm done. Questions? Questions? Yes. Another one over here. 2 questions here.
Here you go, Tracy.
When you were studying at the U of O, did you ever go to the Historical Museum and see a wagon and a canoe that were on display there?
What are we talking about?
When you were a student at the University of Oregon.
Oh.
Yeah, I know it's a long time ago, but I was a little
No,
anyway. My great grandfather and his family came over the Applegate Trail in that wagon and put one of their little daughters in the canoe. And my mother remembered that daughter when she was like an extremely old lady. She remembered her Aunt Banky. So, yeah.
That's a good story. You know what? Oh, it's a good story for several reasons. One of which is that story reminds you of how close we really are to that past. It's not too many links away. Question here.
All right. So at this time when people were going on the Oregon Trail, were they also coming around South America?
Yes.
Okay, that was the very same time.
Yes, yes. Lots of ways they're coming. The main motivation to come by water was to get to California and find gold. There were some people, the first group of Americans to come to Oregon came in 1840, and they came by ship, the Lausanne, and that was, well, the number was up there on the board, 24 people. They were a couple of families, but they were the first. But that was, I don't include those because they're not, those stories I don't include in the book because they're not overland immigrants. They're coming a different route to get here. They're just as significant, but it's not what my story is about.
Joel, right here. I was just wondering if you could kind of go over the process of the wagon trains getting organized and how many were on the trail at a given time. I thought I heard you say 60 or something, and that seems like a phenomenal number. But if you were on the trail, how many trains would be ahead of you?
Oh, it depends on the year. In 1850, when we have 50,000, which I had on my chart, is a conservative number. There are some historians that think the number is as high as 70,000 people that were on the trail. Now, they're basically at midpoint about the same time because everybody had to get, they wanted to get through the mountains before it got too late in the season. And so basically everybody's out in Wyoming and in Idaho about the same time. And there are plenty of stories where the wagon trains were spread 12 miles all crossed out into the plain because there were so many people and there's so much dust. Remember, these people rarely got to bathe. The women wore bonnets, men wore hats. Children often had hats or bonnets too, but your hair is long and it's filthy dirty. You were filthy dirty. You can imagine sanitation, which is the reason for the cholera. The sanitation's an issue, the alkali water. There are all kinds of dangers along the way. And cholera hits very quickly. You're usually dead within 24 hours, oftentimes in 12 hours. You just bang like that. Plenty of stories and diaries about Daddy was healthy, had a good meal, had a good laugh with his friends at dinner for the midday meal, and he died at 2 o'clock in the morning. Just like that, healthy man. So cholera was a virulent killer, and there was a lot of it. So, did I answer your question? There were literally thousands of people on the trail at one time, and of course that makes for problems with the water contamination. Forage is a real issue. Fuel is a real issue because the more people there are, the less likely those resources are there. Everybody's waiting in line sometimes 2 or 3 days to get the ferry across the river because there's 700, and there are plenty of stories like this, 700 wagons lined up there waiting to go across the river. And you could only take so many wagons across and the animals at one time. So, there were a lot of delays, and of course sickness was a major reason for the delays throughout the trip. So people tried to make this golden 20 miles a day. That was seen as what you needed to do to get there. But most people basically went 12 or 15 miles a day because there were so many things that could happen that would keep you from moving forward. All of a sudden, a bunch of people in your group get sick. Well, what do? You stay there and help minister to them? Well, that's what a lot of people did. And they would follow behind. The rest of the train says, we're getting out of here because we don't want to be around these sick people. So we'll see you down the line. So there was a lot of that joining and breaking up and rejoining another group. They would come and go, come and go, come and go. Very, very transitional, lots of flux. More questions? Oh, yes. She wants to yell.
You mentioned that they came here for free land. Was there an established amount of land that per person or per family?
Right. 320 acres. Now that got broken down very quickly because so many people came. There were 7,300 donation land claims in the Willamette Valley, 7,300, and another 2,000 or so in southern Oregon in the Rogue and Umpqua valleys. So roughly 9,500 donation land claims in the western Oregon. It's interesting because three-quarters of those original land claims were no longer in the hands of the families who established them by the end of the century. So most of them had already left the land that they came to get. Right? I'm full of this stuff. I just keeps coming out of here. Sorry. That's it.
Yes, you are full of this stuff. We're so glad. Thank you, Tom.